Hey, it's Drybear. Season 2 for Diablo 4 brings us a bunch of really cool new things to play with. We've already gone over the uniques and legendaries, and we have yet to go over all the vampiric powers, but what I wanted to talk about today in a very short video was going through all the new Paragon Glyphs that each class is getting. Each class in the game is getting 2 new Paragon Glyphs to slot into their Paragon board, and most of them help cover deficiencies that existed before on builds that didn't have ability to scale their damage output, or certain things that just didn't work quite right. And as always, if you have any questions for me, you can pop by my live stream, twitch.tv/Drybear. So let's dive into the list. Keep in mind that the existing glyphs are still going to be there. Some of them got adjusted over the course of season 1, but they're all still in the game as far as we know. And the 2 extra ones that are coming along tend to be very focused on things that didn't scale that well or had issues being played properly at endgame in previous, like season 1, season 0. On top of that, along with these new glyphs comes with a change that makes glyphs a little bit easier to level. They should be going faster in their level up. So based on how high you go on your nightmare dungeon, the XP that you get to be able to apply to the glyphs is going to be increased in season 2. So even though we have more glyphs to level, you should be able to level them faster. Starting with Barbarian. Now, one of the core problems with Diablo 4, one of the many core problems, I'll admit, has been that anything that does flat damage, like a base amount of damage, is harder to play or scale into endgame than anything else. So you think of things that have a pool or a flat damage number, things like that. It's always been hard to get those specific effects and abilities to scale properly up to things like Uber Lilith or now Uber Duriel, that sort of thing. And one of those has been Dust Devils for Barbarian. So a new Paragon Glyph for Barbarian. For every 5 strength purchased with Rage, which is going to be very easy to get for a Barbarian Paragon board, your Dust Devils deal 39.6% additive increased damage. And then if you activate the bonus, which is going to be very easy, you deal 13% multiplicative increased damage for 4 seconds after creating a Dust Devil. So you make all your Dust Devils do up to 40% increased additive damage. And then if you get this, I'm guessing this is going to be a 40, usually with strength, it's like 40 strength required to activate this, which isn't very hard. You deal increased damage for 4 seconds after creating a Dust Devil. Now you might put this in like the starter board. There's a couple boards you could put this in as well, but with the Dust Devil build, it might be fun to try and see if you can get a really strong Dust Devil build going, and maybe even lean that way for things like Whirlwind, as you can now scale them a little bit better than before. Rumble is a new Paragon Glyph for Barbarian. Every 5 strength purchased within Rage, your Earthquakes, which is another same effect as Dust Devil. It's been hard to get Earthquakes to work just right. Not only are they kind of small relative to how big they were in Diablo 3, but they also had trouble scaling into really good endgame situations. So we get another one of these as well. Your Earthquakes, no matter what created the Earthquake, has 39.6% increased additive damage. And if you get the passive, you deal 10% multiplicative increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies and bosses for each active Earthquake. This could be super fun, and you combine this with a new unique helm that allows you to vortex enemies in, and it's generic for any class, so Barbarian can get it. You might be able to do some really fun Earthquake builds for Barbarian specifically. For Druid, we have Electrocution. This is another build that specifically, like Lightning Bolts and Dancing Bolts, have always been flat damage, and they're great for leveling. They're great for getting up to like Nightmare 60, Nightmare 70. When you start pushing Nightmare 100 or Uber Lilith, the flat damage becomes harder and harder to scale for that class build. So for this, for every 5 willpower purchased within range, main stat for Druid, your Lightning Bolts and Dancing Bolts, which are the little shocks that you create through various effects, deal 39.6% additive increased damage, and enemies damaged by your Lightning Bolts or Dancing Bolts take 20% multiplicative increased damage from you and all sources for 5 seconds. So you can see a trend here of them trying to give you another specific Paragon Glyph that isn't just core skills deal more damage, critical strikes do more critical strike damage, vulnerable does more vulnerable damage, right? All of those ones like the exposed glyph that were always so good in season 0 and season 1. Now they're trying to add more options for multiplicative damage for things that previously were hard to scale into late game. So hopefully these end up working the way that I assume they're trying to make them work. Tectonic is another glyph for Druid. For every 5 dexterity purchased within range, your earth skills gain 15% additive critical strike damage. Remember, this all critical strike damage gained from glyphs, Paragon, gear, all of that is additive now. There's just a multiplicative number. There's a scalar on top of everything that applies to that. And additional bonus, you gain 15% lucky hit chance. So there's going to be some interesting builds that come out of this. Being able to get extra crit strike damage on Earth skills specifically is really nice, because in general, Earth skills for Druid are very easy to get critical strike, especially with Petrify and other bonuses that you get for Earth builds for Druid in general. Critically striking with Earth is not all that hard, so adding critical strike damage like this is pretty free and quite nice. And there are some lucky hit chance procs you can do with Dual Element or Nature's Fury or things like that that you could use to get some extra bonuses out of this. So this one isn't an immediate, this is going to be great, but it could end up being really awesome once we get in and start theory crafting it. For Necromancer, we get a new Paragon Glyph, Exhumation. For every 5 intelligence pursuits with range, so another main stat, your corpse skills deal 14% additive increased damage. For every 5 intelligence, so you get a whole bunch of good increased damage for corpse skills in general. This might be really nice, and this might even still work for like Infinimist or Blood Mist builds, but we'll see how this ends up going out. Additional bonus, consuming a corpse fortifies you for 4% of your max life and grants 4% damage reduction. This is going to be super good. You'll probably run this with every Infinimist build in general, but being able to make your corpse skills do more is really nice. You can even do more bursts with these as well, get some extra damage out of that, and get some fortify and defense out of this. You might be able to run a dual hybrid build that focuses on overpower and having corpse explosion and all that, or maybe even miasma from that. But this is kind of an interesting one that might slot into some builds, or maybe even just add some more variety to the meta builds that already existed for Necromancer. Desecration is a willpower Paragon Glyph here. Your desecrated ground deals 59.4% increased damage for each willpower in range. And the additional bonus is while standing in your desecrated ground, you deal increased shadow damage. Now this one's a little more confusing than the other one because they hadn't, I don't think up until now, they've given a very clear definition of what they consider desecrated ground. As far as I'm aware, after having played a Necromancer primarily in Season 0 and having played a lot of Necromancer, I can tell you the things that do count as desecrated ground is anytime you see that like chocolatey, Snickers looking color on the ground, which comes from your Sever trail when you have the boots of the tomb, or when you have the blood wave that turns shadow that leaves that goop on the ground afterwards. As far as I know, those are the only 2 things that officially count as desecrated ground. We're not sure if this is going to count for the miasma for corpse explosion, or if there's going to be other ways to do this, because they haven't been entirely consistent on what they consider desecrated ground. However, even just from the tomb boots on Sever, or even the blood wave, shadow wave, standing on it means that your desecrated ground does increase damage for every 5 willpower, and you deal increased shadow damage, which is great. That can make the Sever build better. It can make the Shadow Dot build better. It can make the Burst Shadow Blight build better. It can even make Infinimist better. So all of these I think could work really well, and does make a really interesting build for being able to use those specific desecrated ground creations. Moving on to Rogue, we get Explosive. For every 5 dexterity, which is main stat for Rogue, purchased within range, your stun grenades deal 39.6% increased damage. Dropping a stun grenade grants you 10% damage reduction for 2 seconds. So they added another one of these. I mentioned in my other video that I've always tried to do a stun grenade traps build for Rogue, and it's just never really been all that great. So I'm happy to see legendary powers and uniques coming in that focus on those stun grenades. You can do stun grenade, smoke grenade. Having those do increased damage is super nice, and be able to get damage reduction on it can help a lot with that survivability as well. So the grenade build for Rogue is looking a little bit more viable in Season 2, and hopefully these end up scaling really nicely in general, coming together. So we'll see how this actually works. You have a lot of different ways to proc stun grenades with the new legendary power, or just built into the kit already when you smoke grenade or dash and things like that. So having all of those scaled up by this glyph, and then also being able to get damage reduction, frees up some of the stats and points that you spend for your build in general, which is pretty cool. Night Stalker is the other Rogue glyph. For every 5 intelligence, not main stat, purchased within range for Rogue, you deal 9.9% increased shadow damage. Additional bonus, when entering stealth, reduces the active cooldown of shadow imbuement by 4 seconds. Now there's a couple ways you can do some really awesome shadow damage with Rogue. The biggest one is going to be shadow imbuement, and obviously death trap for those 2 there. So putting those together can get some really awesome bonuses here. But I'm excited to go into a full shadow build for Rogue, going into shadow imbuement with imbuement bonuses. There's tons of imbuement buffs in the game that are really strong. We've typically seen like Shadow Imbuement used as an AoE option for other builds, like Twisting Blades or things like that, or even just a Death Trap build having that there. But I would like to see a full Shadow Imbuement, full commit Imbuement build that works really, really well for Rogue. And I feel like this Paragon Glyph fits into that archetype really well. Lastly, we come to Sorcerer. Stalagmite is one of the Paragon Glyphs being added. For every 5 intelligence, main stance for Sorcerer, your ice spikes deal 9.9% increased damage. So you can actually scale up the ice spikes, and keep in mind there is, I think it's a new unique that allows you to cause more ice spikes that deal triple damage against frozen targets. So I still think there's going to be some really good frozen orb or blizzard builds coming out in season 2 that focus more on the proc chance ice spikes that come out of those individual pieces, which could be really fun. Additional bonus when you max it out, your ice spikes gain crit strike chance, which is really cool. And you get some damage scaling off that as well. So I'm hoping this creates a little bit more ice variety other than just basic ice shards or just doing the normal triple defense that we see from sorcerers in general, or the cheese CC blizzard build that we saw a lot in season 0 and some in season 1. Invocation is the other one for every 5 dexterity, so not main stat, but I believe they get just critical strike chance from this, which is nice. Purchase within range, your conjuration skills gain 27.7% critical strike damage. For every 5 dexterity, they get 27.7% crit strike, or just additive damage scaling anytime you critically strike, I should say, with the new changes. And the additional bonus is enemies damaged by your conjuration skills deal 1% reduced damage to you for 6 seconds, stacking up to 12%. So again, I think this makes like pure conjuration really interesting, along with the new uniques and legendaries that Sorcerer are getting this season. On top of that, I think Hydra's looking really, really cool with some of these changes here. So I do recommend checking those out. If you're gonna be playing Sorcerer/Sorceress this season, try out a Hydra build, try out a triple element, like a 3 elements conjuration build, or maybe even like an Ice Blades build. I think those could be really, really fun to play around with a lot of these new powers that they're picking up. But those are the 10 Paragon Glyphs that are coming in. You can see they're really trying to focus on adding powers to things that previously just couldn't keep up with the other counterparts in their build set, in their overall comp for that class. And I hope they achieve this, because it seems on paper like it's going to be a nice step forward for everybody. That's what I got for you today on the Paragon Glyphs. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and I'll see you on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.